I've lived in Briar Glen my entire life. It's one of those small, forgotten towns tucked away in the middle of nowhere, where the trees grow too close to the roads and the fog rolls in so thick at night that you can't see your own hand in front of your face. Everyone knows everyone here, and secrets don't stay buried for long. But there's one secret, one rule, that's been passed down for generations, whispered in hushed tones by parents to their children, by elders to anyone who'll listen. It's a rule so ingrained in our town's culture that it's practically law, though you won't find it written down anywhere. Do not follow the tall lady. I heard it for the first time when I was 6 years old. My grandmother, a stern woman with eyes like flint, sat me down on her porch one evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the cicadas were screaming in the trees. She leaned in close, her voice low and serious. "Listen to me, child," she said, her bony fingers gripping my shoulders. "If you ever see her, the tall lady, you run. You run as fast as you can, and you don't look back. Do you understand?" I didn't understand, not really. I was too young to grasp the gravity of her words, too innocent to imagine the horrors that could lurk in the shadows of our quiet town. But I nodded anyway, because even at that age, I knew better than to argue with my grandmother. As I grew older, I heard the rule repeated like a mantra. At school, during sleepovers, around campfires, it was always the same. Do not follow the tall lady. No one ever explained who she was or why we weren't supposed to follow her. It was just one of those things you accepted, like not walking under ladders or avoiding black cats. A superstition, I thought. A silly story meant to scare kids into behaving. But then I saw her. It was a Friday night, the kind of night that feels heavy with possibility. I was 16, restless and bored, itching for something, anything, to break the monotony of small-town life. My best friend, Ellie, and I had decided to sneak out after curfew, something we'd done 100 times before. We weren't looking for trouble, just a little adventure. Maybe we'd drive out to the old quarry, or walk through the woods with nothing but the moon to guide us. Anything to feel alive. We met up at the edge of town, where the streetlights gave way to darkness and the trees loomed like silent sentinels. Ellie was already there, her face pale in the glow of her phone screen. She grinned when she saw me, her teeth flashing white in the gloom. "Ready to break some rules?" she asked, her voice tinged with excitement. I laughed, but there was a nervous edge to it. The woods at night always made me uneasy, though I'd never admit it to Ellie. She was fearless, the kind of person who'd laugh in the face of danger. I admired that about her, even if it sometimes got us into trouble. We set off down the dirt path that led into the woods, the crunch of leaves beneath our feet the only sound in the stillness. The air was cool and damp, and the moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie silver light over everything. We talked as we walked, our voices hushed, as if we were afraid of disturbing the silence. It was Ellie who saw her first. She stopped suddenly, her hand shooting out to grab my arm. I stumbled, nearly losing my balance, and opened my mouth to protest. But the look on her face stopped me cold. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted in a silent gasp. She was staring at something over my shoulder, something that made her blood drain from her face. "What is it?" I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest. Ellie didn't answer. She just pointed, her hand trembling. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. There, standing at the edge of the tree line, was a woman. She was tall, impossibly tall, her head tilted at an unnatural angle as if her neck couldn't quite support its weight. Her limbs were long and spindly, her fingers like twigs that seemed to stretch on forever. She was dressed in tattered rags that fluttered in the breeze, though the air around us was perfectly still. Her face was obscured by a veil of dark hair, but I could feel her eyes on me, burning into my soul. My stomach churned, a cold sweat breaking out on my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from her as possible. But I couldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, paralyzed by a fear I couldn't explain. Ellie was the first to break the spell. She grabbed my hand, her grip like a vice, and yanked me backward. "Run," she hissed, her voice barely above a whisper. We ran. Our feet pounded against the dirt path, the sound echoing in the stillness. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel her presence behind us, a cold, oppressive weight that seemed to grow heavier with every step. The trees blurred together as we sprinted through the woods, branches clawing at our faces and clothes. My lungs burned, my legs aching, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. When we finally burst out of the woods and into the safety of the streetlights, we collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for breath. Ellie was shaking, her face pale and drawn. I wanted to ask her if she'd seen what I'd seen, if she'd felt that same overwhelming dread. But the words caught in my throat. We never spoke of it again. For years, I tried to convince myself that it had been a trick of the light, a figment of my imagination fueled by too many campfire stories. But deep down, I knew the truth. The tall lady was real, and she was something far worse than any ghost or monster. The memory of that night haunted me, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. I avoided the woods after that, sticking to the safety of town. But no matter how hard I tried to forget, the image of her, tall and twisted, her presence suffocating, would creep into my thoughts when I least expected it. It wasn't until I was in my early 20s that I learned the truth about the tall lady. I was working at the local library, a small, dusty building that smelled of old paper and mildew. It was a quiet job, one that gave me plenty of time to read and think. One day, while organizing a stack of old newspapers, I came across a yellowed article from the 1920s. The headline caught my eye: "Mysterious Disappearances Plague Briar Glen." Curious, I began to read. The article detailed a series of strange occurrences that had taken place in our town nearly a century ago. People, mostly children and teenagers, had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. There were no signs of struggle, no clues to indicate where they'd gone. They'd simply vanished, as if they'd been plucked from existence. The townsfolk had been terrified, convinced that some malevolent force was at work. They'd formed search parties, combed the woods, and even called in outside help, but no trace of the missing was ever found. The disappearances stopped as suddenly as they'd begun, leaving behind only questions and fear. But what really caught my attention was a single line near the end of the article. Some residents claimed to have seen a tall, shadowy figure lurking near the woods before each disappearance. My blood ran cold. I spent the next few weeks poring over every old book, newspaper, and record I could find, desperate for answers. The more I learned, the more my unease grew. The tall lady wasn't just a local legend, she was a curse, a harbinger of death that had plagued our town for generations. According to the stories, she appeared only at night, her presence heralded by an unnatural stillness in the air. Those who saw her were overcome with an irresistible urge to follow her, as if she had some kind of hypnotic power over them. They would walk into the woods, never to be seen again. But here's the thing, not everyone who saw her disappeared. Some, like Ellie and me, managed to escape. And those who did were forever changed, their lives marked by a lingering sense of dread and paranoia. It was as if she'd left a piece of herself behind, a shadow that clung to their souls. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, the product of overactive imaginations and a town desperate for answers. But the more I dug, the more I realized that the truth was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The final piece of the puzzle came to me in the form of an old journal I found tucked away in the library's archives. It belonged to a man named Samuel Hargrove, a farmer who had lived in Briar Glen in the late 1800s. His entries were rambling and disjointed, filled with fear and desperation. "She comes at night," he wrote. "I hear her voice, soft and sweet, calling to me from the woods. It's not her true voice, I know that. It's a trick, a lure. But God help me, I want to follow it. I want to see her face, to know what she is. But I can't. I mustn't." The others who followed her, they never came back. The entries grew more frantic as they went on, Samuel's handwriting becoming increasingly erratic. He spoke of sleepless nights, of hearing whispers in the wind, of seeing her standing at the edge of his property, watching him. He was convinced that she was after him, that she wouldn't stop until she had him. The final entry was dated October 31st, 1892. "I can't take it anymore. She's in my dreams, in my thoughts. I see her everywhere I look. I know I have to do. If I don't, she'll take me. And I can't let that happen. I won't. The journal ended there. I searched for more information about Samuel Hargrove, but there was nothing. It was as if he vanished into thin air. I wish I could say that I put it all behind me, that I moved on with my life and left the tall lady in the past where she belonged. But the truth is, I couldn't. The more I learned, the more I felt her presence creeping back into my life, like a shadow I couldn't escape. It started with small things, a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, a whisper in the wind that sounded like my name. I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was letting the stories get to me. But deep down, I knew better. And then, one night, I saw her again. I was driving home from work, the road dark and empty. The fog had rolled in, thick and heavy, reducing the world to a blur of gray. I was tired, my mind wandering, when I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the road, her tall, twisted form silhouetted against the fog. My heart leapt into my throat, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. For a moment, I just sat there, my heart pounding in my chest. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, her head tilted at that unnatural angle, her hair obscuring her face. And then, slowly, she began to walk toward me. Panic surged through me, my instinct screaming at me to drive, to get away. But I couldn't. My body was frozen, my eyes locked on her as she drew closer. I could see the tattered rags she wore, the way her limbs seemed to stretch and twist with every step. And then, just as she reached the hood of my car, she stopped. Her head tilted further, and for the first time, I saw her face. It was wrong. Her features were distorted, her eyes too large, her mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. But it wasn't just her appearance that terrified me, it was the way she looked at me, as if she knew me, as if she'd been waiting for me. And then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost musical, but there was something beneath it, something cold and ancient. "Follow me," she said, her words sending a shiver down my spine. I wanted to. God help me, I wanted to. There was a part of me that longed to step out of the car, to take her hand and let her lead me into the darkness. But then I remembered the rule, the one that had been drilled into me since childhood. Do not follow the tall lady. With a surge of adrenaline, I slammed my foot on the gas, the car lurching forward. She didn't move, didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, her grotesque smile widening as I sped past her. I didn't stop until I was home, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I locked the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew she was still out there, watching, waiting. And I knew she wouldn't stop until she had me. That was a year ago. Since then, I've seen her more times than I can count. She's everywhere, in my dreams, in the shadows, in the corners of my vision. I've tried to leave Briar Glen, to start over somewhere new, but something always pulls me back. It's as if the town itself is alive, a living, breathing entity that won't let me go. I don't know how much longer I can hold out. Every day, the urge to follow her grows stronger, her voice whispering in my ear, promising me things I can't even begin to understand. I know what will happen if I give in, if I break the one rule that's kept me safe all these years. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the fog rolls in and the world is silent, I wonder if it's worth it. If maybe, just maybe, following her would be better than living in this constant state of fear. Do not follow the tall lady. It's the one rule that's kept our town alive, the one thing that separates us from the darkness. But rules were made to be broken, weren't they? And I'm so tired of running.